Damon Lindelof, what do you think the best way to describe The Leftovers is for people that have never seen the show?
Oh God.
I know. This is a tough one.
Yeah, softball.
Yeah.
There is an event that happens on one October afternoon, in which 2% of the world's population sort of abruptly and inexplicably vanishes, and they just leave the planet. Like if you and I were there, one of us would just cease to be, and that's 140 million people worldwide, a fairly significant number. But when you think about it, it's just 1 in 50. So the event is large scale and incredibly upsetting, and it disrupts most of the world's religions and infrastructure. But it's not large enough to cause the apocalypse. This thing is basically labeled the sudden departure, and the scientific community is completely and totally comes up empty. And the most religious communities, probably the evangelical Christians, try to call this the rapture initially, but unfortunately, the people who disappeared, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the selection process. So while there are a lot of good human beings who go, there are also a lot of assholes. And so no one quite understands why this happened, or where the people went. And the show basically is about the people who are left over, who are kind of moving on with their lives and trying to make sense of things.
That's perfect. I don't think I could possibly have said it better myself.
But please try.
Thank God, because you are the showrunner and writer of the show, and so that, thank God you passed that test. Now, for me, the show is about lots of things. It's about religion and grief and loss and family and a whole bunch of themes. And specifically, season 1 was, for many, a deeply, profoundly moving experience. It touched on loss and grief like very few other series have done and managed to do. What were you trying to achieve when you originally set out to bring Tom Perotta's novel to the screen?
I read Tom's book, and Tom is a continuing creative force on the show, not from afar, but actually he is in the writer's room most every day and has been very hands-on from early days. He and I wrote the pilot together. And when I read his book, my wife would probably tell you that I'm an easy cry. But I just started weeping at kind of random places. And I felt that, although there's a bit of a genre element to the premise, obviously, that the way that Tom wrote the book was very grounded, and it did tap into these ideas that you just mentioned. And the thing about grief, when someone dies, is there's a process by which, if you follow it, you can move through your grief and come to some kind of acceptance. And because there's a body, and you can take the body and you can bury it, or you can cremate it, and you can have a memorial service. But if this person that you loved is now gone inexplicably, and you don't know where they went or if they're coming back, or why you didn't go with them, that grief cycle would just basically repeat on a loop over and over again. And I found that just to be incredibly fresh and original and scary. I didn't quite know what that looked like or what that felt like. And so the show is basically an exploration of trying to tap into this kind of idea of ambiguous loss, that on one side of it is incredibly sad and depressing, but which I think was probably the primary vibe that emerged from the first season of the show. But then as we moved on beyond that, I think that there are a lot of other fascinating permutations, particularly as it relates to people's coping mechanisms. Some people are going to join cults. People are going to gravitate towards belief systems that probably wouldn't have made any sense before. But I really like the idea of the weird behaviors that would basically emerge out of this kind of collective worldwide PTSD that occurred in the wake of this sudden departure.
Yeah, I like that. I've never really heard that you say that before, but I like that worldwide PTSD because you could really see it on many of the characters' faces, which is what we all cling to when we're watching it and getting to know these people of the confusion and the and like they were bewildered. It was a really unsettling season, and I think it was really successful, but it was really dark. And you've been on
Yes.
record saying that it was super dark, and a lot of people either complained about that or they just weren't into it. From the stunning opening credits, then the pilot, all the way to the punch in the face season finale. That really was a punch in the face. I recall you saying that you wanted to move into a slightly different direction for season 2, and you did that. You did lighten it up a bit. Excuse me. So talk us through the deliberate transition that you guys made in tone for the show from season 1 to season 2.
I think that that the first season is basically, as you know, but I'll just reiterate, takes place 3 years after this event happened, and I think that we're just seeing people in their lives kind of trying to get by, and the energy of that season, they kind of didn't know what to do. They weren't moving towards anything. They were just sort of existing, and that was intentional on our part. But I think as a storyteller, kind of immensely challenging, especially when so many of the shows that we watch as writers and producers on The Leftovers and love have this kind of propulsive plot mechanism driving them in spite of all these kind of deeper themes and emotional relationships with the characters. But something like The Americans, which is my favorite show, or Game of Thrones, they have this tremendous plot drive, and because the characters all want something. Season 1 of The Leftovers, it really wasn't clear what the characters wanted, and I think season 2, the deliberate transition, as we sat down with kind of a new group of writers who had watched the first season but weren't drinking the Kool-Aid, hadn't been, were completely and totally, certainly unimpressed by me, which I love to surround myself with writers who think that I'm full of shit, because they'll tell you what they really think. But I think that this idea of saying what these characters want is to feel better. Let's move them out of their rut and towards some system where they can begin to feel better. So if they're being haunted by a ghost, and I mean that literally in the case of season 2, what are they going to do to get rid of that ghost, as opposed to just sort of sitting around and complaining about it? And I think that energy really infused the second season with a greater sense of purpose and stakes, and probably made it more enjoyable to watch without abandoning, I think, the energy of the first season, all those things that you mentioned in terms of grief and depression and sadness and loss. Who wants to watch that on a Sunday night? I know I do, but I also want other people to watch the show too.
Yeah, that's true. And you pick up on it immediately in season 2, episode 1, with the new opening credits. I know you've probably talked about the opening credits as nauseum, but it's such a major part of the show. The first season's opening credits were stunningly beautiful. The second season opening, but they were really ominous, and they were setting the tone. The second season opening credits are so different. And in fact, at first I was like, oh, okay, you've changed them. I really love the first one, but I ended up really starting to look forward to listening to and watching the second season opening credits. And when I sit down with my wife and we watch the show, she can't actually watch them because she finds them so sad and so beautiful. And we all have different reactions to it. But talk us through the process of wanting to change them, and then the way they turned out.
I agree with you about the first season credits. I obviously liked them quite a bit because we did them, but there was a real religiosity in terms of that presentation, and I do feel like one of the things that has drawn me to the show is it's a show that kind of talks about religion in perhaps an interesting and at times kind of off-putting way, but that idea of presenting a religious fresco with this kind of dirge that our brilliant composer Max Richter wrote for us, it just kind of it just brought that feeling where right at the beginning of every episode you were going to kind of feel the weight and the gravity that was pulling on all the characters therein. But then kind of along the lines of what I was saying before about the second season is now I want these characters to start escaping that gravity. It really all started with the idea of what if we change the opening titles. There are other great series that have changed their opening title sequence in between seasons. The Wire changed it, would change their song every year, but it was the same song. Weeds did something similar, but an entirely new title presentation I felt would be a good way to signal to the audience that the show was moving in a different direction. And then one of the producers on the show, this guy Patrick Markey, turned me on to this Iris DeMent song. He said, I heard the song and I thought about the show, and Let the Mystery Be basically became exactly the kind of rallying cry of someone who is trying to let go of this thing and trying to move on. But more importantly, the tone that Iris DeMent, sang that song in, felt like there was sort of a wink there. And so even though the image system is upsetting enough for your wife to be saddened, I felt the song kind of played against that. And we started to kind of tap into what we kind of call internally the Irish wake idea, which is, you're at a funeral, but people are having fun and enjoying themselves. The laughter that they have about their loved one who is gone is still it's still embedded in grief, but it's an entirely different energy. And also the Texas of it all. We were geographically moving the show away from the kind of pallor, the blue sort of, cold landscape of New York, and entering into the warmth of Texas. And this new idea in season 2, this idea of a town called Miracle, where no one departed, this grand statistical anomaly. And it felt like all of those things kind of combined together and felt right. But what was kind of amazing was when we changed, I'm not on Twitter anymore because it would make me go crazy because I'm far too insecure to deal with it. But what kind of filtered up, even amongst the people who kind of liked the first season, and as you're aware, there was a lot of divisiveness about it, but it did feel like there was unanimous consent that the opening title sequence took itself far too seriously and people hated it. And then as soon as we switched it out, people started saying, I really love the old title sequence. Yeah. So it's actually very refreshing for you to say that you liked the first one.
Yeah, I really did. It's like you can't win with fan reaction, I suppose, and critic response. But I remember with The Leftovers, I know, and you will be until the day you die. But the thing is, I remember with The Leftovers telling a lot of people, you've really got to watch this show. It's profoundly moving. You'll love it. And they said, yeah, look, we did watch it to begin with, and we were turned off because it's not the kind of thing I want to watch. It's too sad, and I don't want to deal with that kind of stuff. And it was really difficult to get people on board. But when they did, boy, did they really respond positively. And the second season, I felt, was even more well received than the first. It did very well critically and amongst fan reaction, as far as I can tell. What do you think? Did season 2 meet, exceed, or fall short of your expectations once it was done and dusted?
I think it definitely exceeded my expectations. We always come at it. We try to operate from a place of confidence, and that's not hubris. But I don't think anybody wants. If it's my job to ask others to basically watch the TV show that we're making, we should at least be making a presentation with some confidence. You don't put food in front of someone and go like, I don't know if this is any good. Chances are they're not going to want to eat it. And if they do, it's not going to taste great. So I do feel like something was happening in the writer's room. And certainly Mimi Leader, who is our producing director and executive producer on the show, she came in about halfway through season 1, and she really took the reins on the actual production. And I think her vision, her confidence, the way that she worked with the actors, the way that she kind of both nailed down the visual look and tone of the show, but then wasn't afraid to deviate from it and experiment. All of those things kind of started clicking. So I think that by mid-season, as I was watching cuts of the show, I was starting to feel like, oh, wow, this is cool. This is working. And obviously incredible performances by the returning characters from season 1. Justin Theroux, Carrie Coon, Chris Eccleston, Ann Dowd, Margaret Qualley, Chris Ilka, and Liv Tyler. Sorry, but then the new we added some new characters, and in fact embedded with those new characters for almost the entire first episode of the second season. And Kevin Carroll and Regina King kind of anchored, and Giovanna Depo, who plays their son, this new family, the Murphys. I was just completely and totally enthralled by them. And so what we had on the page and what we imagined in the room when we watched it come to life, that was really the most exciting part. It felt like it was all the best parts of the old show with this entirely new, exciting energy behind it. And that was really infused by the new cast, not to mention the new location.
Yeah. And I remember when season 2 finished, and immediately after the season finale, I sat there and let it wash over me. And then I began pining for HBO to immediately renew the show. And then I started stressing. I went through like all those stages of grief because I started stressing, maybe that's it, they've had a good run, it'll be over and we'll just have to deal with that. And then the renewal happened pretty quickly, actually, relatively quickly. Yeah. And talk us through the time leading up to the renewal and how happy you were, I suppose, that you were getting a final third season to wrap up the story as much as you can.
Yeah, well, you and I were pining together for sure, as were probably all the people on the show. And I think that we became aware as we were writing the final couple episodes of the season. The show by then had premiered, and it was ratings challenged, I think, is a very
nice
way of putting it. And so, although we've had incredible creative support from HBO from the word go, I'm also not ignorant to what happens to shows that nobody is watching. And so we had always set out, our plan for season 2 did not change as a result of that. We always set out to basically make each season feel like it was its own novel, that it wasn't going to end with a cliffhanger, but it would end in a way that we felt like we could leave these characters here and that there wouldn't be any major plot threads dangling. And we executed that plan. But at the same time, I definitely felt like there were more ideas to explore, that there was one more chapter. And it really felt like when we finished the second season, we were closer to the end than we were to the beginning. And so the math basically would suggest there's one more season of the show. And so I was the finale aired, and then there was kind of radio silence. And again, HBO had been immensely supportive. It really liked the show a lot, but we weren't hearing anything and didn't know what was going to happen. And then the critical community sort of kind of rose up and echoed some of the sentiments that you said, which is like, wow, I really hope this isn't it for The Leftovers. I really like it. And even though there were some critics who I don't disagree with, who said, we liked it and we're actually okay with it ending here. But I think that HBO kind of heard those voices, and the thing that needed to happen, the show started to shift ever slightly into that, into the zeitgeisty space, or at least people were writing about it and saying interesting things about it. So they were able to take that and use it as an impetus for a pickup. And then when I got the call, I was super excited, but in the very same call, I said, I am, to Michael Lombardo, who's the head of HBO, I'm so grateful that you're going to let us do more of this. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to just do one more. And if we can announce that now, in the same breath as the fact that the show is coming back, because if we say, hey, The Leftovers has been picked up for a third season, and a month from now we say, it's the last season, everyone's going to think that that we screwed up in some way and that you changed your mind about the show. And having had some experience with, ending the show when it's ready to end, Lost perhaps, and I've been on the record as saying I think it went on a little bit too long. This was an opportunity to say, let's not push it. And HBO was gracious enough to say, we're cool with there being just one more season.
Yeah, it was a really great move. I think I think it made it more exciting. It really did. You talk about how the show became a bit more zeitgeisty. I think I've got that sense as well, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think it really started to hit that point when people were really taken aback with the episode International Assassin. A lot of people have written a lot of words about that particular episode. A lot of people are saying it's one of the best episodes of the season of any show. It was very critically acclaimed, and that's not just coming from me. That you can just Google it and you'll see that a lot of people have really dug that episode. So I want to talk a little bit about that one. I wanted to know how the episode evolved into what it became, and was there any concern that the audience wouldn't necessarily go along for the ride?
First off, I really appreciate you saying that, and secondly, yes, there was a tremendous amount of concern, but I think that we were, as they say in the poker trade, pot committed, which is like it was too late to go back, and so we knew that there was going to be a major storyline in the second season where Kevin Garvey, our hero, is basically being haunted by the ghost of Patty Levin, this very charismatic but silent at times cult leader from the first season of the show, who basically ran this cult that his wife had joined, and she quite memorably commits suicide in front of Kevin. And so now she's basically stuck to him. And so we're like, okay, this is the dilemma that this guy is facing. And then emotionally, he needs to get rid of Patty. Patty clearly represents something inside Kevin psychologically that he needs to get rid of. And so the storyline, we had to have an answer of, as soon as we kind of fell in love with that idea, how is he going to get rid of her? Like, it can't be easy. How does one get rid of ghosts? And in this case, we started talking about Patty less as a ghost and more like a demon. And so, because that's how she was representing as a ghosts tend to be helpful in these sorts of stories, or in romantic comedies. They're trying to get their surviving spouse back to love again. Patty is the exact opposite of that. She's trying to get Kevin to leave his family, if not kill himself. And then we were like, oh, what if he has to kill himself? What if that's how he gets rid of Patty? He dies, but he chooses to do so willingly. And we all got very excited about that idea, because building a construct by which someone is driven to suicide to solve a solution, solve a problem, that was just really interesting to us as writers. And on the other side, so we're like, oh, that's great, Kevin's going to kill himself. Then we had to come up with, okay, once he kills himself, then what?
Then what? Yeah.
And I think it was probably Parada at first who suggested that we just kind of do our leftover spin on Dante's Inferno. And we all thought that was a wonderful idea, but none of us were smart enough to understand Dante's Inferno. Tom is a literary professor in addition to being an acclaimed novelist. So we started talking a bit about Dante, and then other sort of afterlife presentations that were interesting to us, and we were really kind of getting nowhere. And we spent 2 weeks in the writer's room having this exact concern that you are now asking about, which is the audience going to follow us here? And it was all feeling very, very expected, very precious. It had no sense of humor. It wasn't taking, it was taking itself far too seriously. It was overwrought. And then I can't remember who it was who said it, but someone in the writer's room said, like, the word assassinate, Kevin's got to assassinate Patty, because that was always going to be the objective in this afterlife. And I just said, I wish that we could just do the parallax view in the afterlife. And I saw everybody who'd been kind of hunched down in their seats for the past 2 weeks suddenly sit up and smile. And for the first hour, it was like we were just joking about doing this idea. Kevin, Patty Patty Levin is a senator who is going to become the president of the United States, and Kevin is an international assassin in a hotel who basically must get access to the candidate and then shoot her in the head with a silenced pistol. And at a certain point, maybe 2 hours later, we all looked at each other and said, are we actually going to do this? And
Let's do it.
the concern came later. I think actually once we wrote the script and started seeing dailies, then it was sort of like, oh, wow, like we're doing this. But Thoreau was just so completely and totally committed to it. And Ann Dowd was fantastic. Stephen Williams, who plays Virgil, that's our Dante rip. Also, that all the actors were just completely played it totally straight. So the absurdity of the premise really kind of complemented the strength of their performances. And it was all really kind of built around this idea of, can we get Kevin Garvey to push a little girl into a well? And that won't be the stupidest thing you've ever seen, but you'll actually feel some profound emotion in that moment. The entire episode ended up being in service of that. And again, I think Justin, when you work with an actor, especially on a TV show, you think you kind of know what their capabilities are. You know what their moves are. He busted out some new moves that I had never seen before, and I think that the episode works in large function thanks to him and Craig Zobel, who directed the episode, just did an amazing job. So the margin for failure was incredibly high, and the possibility for success was incredibly narrow, but somehow we threaded the needle. And I think it was probably exciting to watch because you felt like it was on the verge of going off the rails.
Yeah. Like any moment, like reading the premise before I watched it, I thought, oh no, this might be a bit of a car wreck. Let's give it a go. And anyone who doesn't watch the show is probably going to read the synopsis and think, no, I don't think I can go along. But I'm telling people as objectively as I can, it was philosophical, audacious, unpredictable, thrilling, unexpectedly emotional. It really was. And you can read that, as I said before, Google it, because a lot of people have written a lot of stuff about this particular episode. It really impressed a lot of us. So congratulations on that, I guess.
I'm afraid of Google, but I also just need to give a shout out to my co-writer on that episode, Nick Hughes. That was the first episode. He was a writer's assistant in the first season, joined the staff in the second, but that was the first episode that he wrote. And again, I get to talk to you and be the face of the show, but I really mean it when I say that the collaborative energies surrounding The Leftovers, all the amazing writers and other producers, the directors that come in, the cast, like there's no way the show would ever work without them, and in fact, it often works in spite of me. So I would be derelict in not mentioning all those incredible collaborators.
Well, you saying that, a lot of times, especially for TV directors, they're not as heralded as they should be. Writers and creative showrunners are really king on TV. But we can pinpoint the work of people like Michelle McLaren and Leslie Linker Glatter and Michael Reimer and David Nutter and Tim Van Patten, and, there's Jack Bender. And on your show, you got Mimi Letter and Craig Zobel, and really some great work by the directors. How do you think the directors on this show have helped define the show?
I think that a lot of it is that it's a hard job, the TV directing job, because you essentially come in, you have 7 or 8 days to prep a script that's literally being handed to you the minute that you get off the plane, and you have to work inside a crew that you did not hire, and in many cases you don't have relationships with, and people are looking to you for vision. But I think that all the directors that we've had since the first season, many of whom returned for the second, and moving into the third, again, we're going to be using the directors that already kind of know the show. We've given them some sense of autonomy and authorship themselves, because when they take ownership of the material, something special happens. I know that there are a lot of showrunners who like to be on set. I don't. I feel like we hand off the material to the director. I have a tone meeting with the director. We talk a lot through the prep period, and then they do what they do. And then I get the material back after they've made their edit. But the show is better for me letting go of it for that period of time. And I think that really empowers strong voices. And in addition to the names that you mentioned on The Leftovers, Nicole Castle directed what I thought was an extraordinary episode last season, the fifth episode, the Matt Jameson episode, where he basically gets booted out of Miracle and has to get his wristband back. And Eccleston gives a great performance. And Nicole directed an amazing episode. Keith Gordon directed the Meg episode, the penultimate episode of the season. He had directed the Matt Jameson episode from the previous season. So just incredible directors. And I again feel immensely lucky to work alongside them. And again, I think that you let them basically cook the food. You give them the ingredients, but you have to let them cook.
That's a good way of putting it. And another person who adds the chili flakes is the
I'm hungry.
composer. I'm getting hungry too, and it's only 7:30 in the morning for me. Mark Snow on the X-Files, Bear McCreary on Battlestar Galactica. They're the kind of people that I remember when I think about great composers. You've got Max Richter. You've already talked about him briefly with his work on the show, but it's for this show in particular, that evocative and moving score. There's key themes that he uses. One of them's called The Departure. If you have the soundtrack to the show, you know what I'm talking about. Tell us about his contribution to the show, because it really is very critical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Peter Berg, who directed the pilot for The Leftovers, he was at a play in New York City right around the time that we were making the pilot. And it was either Hamlet or Macbeth. I can't remember. Alan Cumming was doing a one-man. I think it was Hamlet. And there was this, in between the scenes, the lights would go down and they would play this music. And Pete came back from the play and said, we've got to find the composer for who did this music, because it was just so emotionally intense. And that was Max Richter. That's how we found our way to Max. And he lives in Berlin. And so I called him up, and we had a number of great phone conversations, showed him the pilot. We temped the pilot with pre-existing Max Richter music, because I think ultimately it's very simple. It's very emotional. It's not traditional score where it's kind of overdone. And I think that Max very wisely said, I don't want the music to tell people how to feel. I want the music to feel like people are feeling. And so he just wrote a number of kind of really beautiful pieces that it's almost impossible for me to describe, but every time I heard them, I did tap into that energy that you just mentioned, and I just felt it was so consistent with what we were trying to do tonally on the show. And he's been a real collaborator too. He gets the outlines and the scripts. We talk about the stuff that we want him to do. He's interested in using music in unconventional places. And then there are sometimes places where we will use his music and he'll watch the cut and say, I don't think there should be music here. I think you should just play it dry, which is sort of like, the opposite of a basketball player saying, throw me the ball. But that's the kind of person he is. So again, I agree with you about the composers you mentioned. Bear McCreary, not just on Battlestar, and then basically kind of owning. Bear was able to take All Along the Watchtower and basically kind of make that his own, and then make it Battlestars. And his music on The Walking Dead is extraordinary. But Michael Giacchino was such. The music on Lost was, again, almost like a character on the show. He wrote themes for all 87 regular characters on Lost. I'm exaggerating slightly, but that's one of my favorite parts of this job is working with brilliant composers like Max and Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's a bunch of stuff I want to ask you about generally before I let you go. I've kept you hostage here for a while now, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. And because we're all of us who love this show are just desperately trying to work out what the hell you're going to do for season 3. You made tweaks for season 2, and I'm sure you're going to make them for season 3. But what can you tell us? Because you're due to start filming next month, right?
Yeah, we actually start shooting on Monday.
Right.
So. It's I should probably be writing right now. And I do appreciate you taking the time to talk. We convened the writers back at the end of the year, and we spent almost 6 weeks just building the entire season. I think knowing that the show is going to end, and is really energized all of us. We brought on a couple of new writers, which I think is incredibly helpful in terms of not resting on one's laurels, and it also brings new ideas and voices into the room. But most importantly, that idea, the Kool-Aid idea, where they're just not at all impressed by me or anything that I have to say. So I actually have to argue almost like in a jury room for things that I'm passionate about. And if I can convince everyone, then I know it's a good idea. And everyone is that juror at some point in the process. But we basically said, where are we ending? What's the final scene? What's the final scene of The Leftovers, of the series of The Leftovers? And once we were able to figure out what that was, then we're like, okay, what happens in the episode leading up to that scene? And now, how do we earn that episode? You know, now that we've got our destination, how do we plot and navigate our way there? And to be able to do that for a guy who is very confident in the area of ending things, it's been liberating, because I just feel there's a lot of anxiety and stress that goes with this job, a lot of insecurity that is part and parcel with being a writer in general. And for this season, I actually feel, you know, at peace in a way that I never have before, because we had those conversations with such a high degree of specificity. And again, it's just a huge blessing to know that the show is going to end on our own terms. I really feel like we're in control of the elephant in the room. It may knock us around with its tusks on occasion, but we've got the saddle on it. I think. That's
good. I like the way that you did that. So you can't tell us all the spoilers. I won't do that. But what can we look forward to? Are we going to see the same people? I mean, I don't know what you're allowed to really tell us, but it's so unpredictable. I have no idea what to expect.
I mean, I think I can say that everyone who was alive at the end of the second season, you will see again in the third. As to whether or not we're bringing new characters into the mix, I don't particularly want to spoil that. But you know, what I will say is that the energy that has always been surrounding this show, and that I felt when I read Tom's novel. And of course, Tom is very present for the third season, and a lot of his ideas are finding their way into it. The way that he always described the book, The Leftovers, was that it was post-apocalyptic, but if you looked outside your window, you couldn't really tell the apocalypse happened. So if you watch a show like The Walking Dead, the apocalypse happened. It looks that way. It has all that those tropes, which we love and embrace. That's why, you know, we're kind of obsessed with the end of the world. But as we started talking about the end of the series in a show that basically deals with, you know, an idea that may have heralded the end of the world, because that's the kind of rapture ideology, we just started thinking a lot about apocalyptic thinking and how people behave if they think that the world is going to end. It's that Y2K idea where you're kind of laughing and joking about it, like it's not really going to happen. But then by December 28th, you walk into the grocery store and all the water bottles are gone, and you start to go, shit. Does everyone else know something that I don't know? So I guess what I could say to you is thematically, if the audience knows that the show is ending, there's actually an opportunity for us to play with the idea of the fact that the world is going to end, and the audience would say they might actually do that because there's not going to be a season 4. And what does that look like at a Leftovers frequency? How do we do that idea a little bit differently? Maybe even with the same kind of sense of humor and emotional pathos as International Assassin, which you mentioned. I think that there's a way to do the apocalypse that we haven't quite seen before. And those are some of the ideas and themes that are swirling around without giving away any specific plot spoilers.
Yeah. Well, Just thinking back over the last 2 years, the Emmys inexplicably ignored the show last season. It was really quite frustrating for fans of the show, but it happens from time to time. And hopefully this season the show might crack through the vast array of peak TV that we are now, that they're all jockeying for attention. There's so much good TV, right?
Amazing.
Amazing. So but what are your thoughts on the Emmys and what a nomination or win from the TV Academy means, given your past experience with Lost?
I mean, I feel like because of what you just said, because of peak TV and not just so much TV, but so much excellent TV, for a show to basically break into that space where it's considered an Emmy contender, it has to do a number of special things right out of the gate. It has to be in the zeitgeist. It has to be cool. It has to be beautifully written. It has to be all fresh and new. It has to have a cast that you've kind of never seen before, or a central performance that you're already familiar with the actor doing something new, like Kevin Spacey on House of Cards. But shows that we've seen permeate the Emmy consciousness, as it were, like Orange is the New Black or Transparent, they all just kind of arrived in their first season almost flawless. And I think that you see a show like Mr. Robot doing that this year, where I don't even want to have a conversation about The Leftovers possibility for Emmy contention if Mr. Robot is not nominated. And I kind of feel the same way about The Americans. I think that The Americans have struggled to basically get into that drama space, and it's completely and totally befuddling to me. But I really mean this from the bottom of my heart when I say it's our goal this year to not get nominated for anything, but for people to at least say we were snubbed. And after season 1, there were no nominations, but also nobody was saying oh man, you got robbed. And I think that this idea of saying Game of Thrones is just in, Mr. Robot is just in, The Americans should absolutely be in, House of Cards probably in, and so the rest of us are all kind of fighting for those other spots, and any kind of recognition you get, I would love more than anything else for just some of our actors to be recognized because they did such an incredible job. I would love to see Mimi Leader recognized because she not only directed some of the most amazing episodes of the show last year, but did it while running the show down in Texas. So, any kind of the new opening title sequence, anything would be awesome. And it's not my place to say, I don't know why we haven't cracked the barrier. I do think there was a difference in perception between seasons 1 and seasons 2. So hopefully, but also it boils down to how many people are aware of the show. More big ticket shows that have 4 million people watching them. That's 4 million more impressions that you make in terms of potential Emmy voters. So hopefully the word will get out that the show is worth watching, because the people who do watch it seem to have a positive response, especially to the second year. But I'm just looking to get snubbed, Rob. Just snub me, man.
If we can get that snub happening, then, there'll be riots from TV critics who showered attention on you guys at the Critics' Choice Awards a few months ago. If The Leftovers doesn't make a dent at the Emmys, I'm sure there'll be a lot of very angry critics writing articles. And that's something.
Yes.
So let's hope for the nominations first, and then if not, the second best.
Yeah, I think we're 100 to 1 currently on the Gold Derby post. I'm looking to get to 80 to 1.
If you can get to
those are odds,
that'd be great.
Those are odds I can work with.
Yeah, 80 is good. I like 80.
There's a chance. Yes.
There's a chance. Let's go for gold. One lost question, because we could do it in a whole hour on your past work, really, but let's not go there because you don't have all day. But I remember looking back how deeply invested I was in that show, like the X-Files when I was a kid, and Star Trek before it, the new version, so I wasn't alive for the old one.
Sure.
It was genre TV at its best, and it did very well critically with the Academy, with audiences. And I remember desperately trying to ascertain and decipher what was going on. I remember the season 2 premiere, which is my favorite episode, Man of Science, Man of Faith, which you wrote. I pored over details, watching in awe as it unfolded on my TV. And I'm just wondering if you could take us back to those relatively early days of Lost, when was really quite a sensation on broadcast TV. It was a different landscape even just back then. What first comes to mind when you look back at the early days of Lost?
Well, as I've talked about kind of ad nauseum, I was so terrified and anxious and sad in those early days. It's very often hard to separate the emotional experience of that dream that I think anybody in a creative position has, of being kind of naked out there on the stage and everybody's pointing and laughing and shouting that the emperor has no clothes. And then when the show premiered, at the time the internet existed, but it was a pre-Twitter landscape. But what I was hearing back was like, don't screw this up, because it feels like you could do so at any minute. Kind of trying to ride that energy of, well, that's exciting. The idea that something, as I mentioned before, could go off the rails at any minute. And I think that as hard as it was to break an episode of Lost, what was immensely liberating is we didn't know what we were ripping off. So these conventional ideas that we inherited in 2004, where that the audience didn't want a genre show, we knew that wasn't true because of X-Files and many other genre shows that had been successful prior to that, cult shows. I was a huge Whedon fan. Buffy and Angel were loomed very large in terms of my influences. And the serialization was bad, because if the audience missed any given episode of a show, they would just basically fall off the train. The DVR thing was starting to happen, but the conventional thinking was every episode needed to have a beginning, middle, and end. But the shows that I loved, Hill Street Blues, Twin Peaks, West Wing, had highly serialized engines, both as that it related to plot and character. And so the idea of sitting in front of a blank whiteboard for every 8 days, we had to break a new episode of Lost. We did 25 episodes in the first season, and just saying, like, I don't know what is going to happen this week. Let's turn that into an advantage, because if we don't know, then the audience doesn't know. And that's an exciting idea, because if we watch an episode of a procedural drama, even though it's still executed at a very high level, both directorially and performance-wise, we kind of know they're going to get the bad guy. We kind of know that the good lawyer is going to win, at least every 4 or 5 weeks, and then there'll be 1 week where they lose, etc. But the idea that nobody knows what's going to happen next, let's write into that. Let's step into that vortex, and that's really kind of like how I remember, at least creatively, the first year or two of Lost.
Yeah, and finally, so that I can let you go, you're so renowned for your work on numerous screenplays. That's been talked about to death, really, and you've had a hand in some really seminal sci-fi, like the new Star Trek franchise and Prometheus and other work. You didn't start out in sci-fi on TV necessarily, but of all the work you've done to date, given that you've had such a genre focus, when The Leftovers is said and done and you've moved on from that, are you going to do something completely out of left field and non-genre? Like, are you going to stay with genre or not? Like, what's your focus?
That's a great question, and the honest answer is, I don't know. The heart wants what the heart wants, and after Lost ended, I think that I was sort of in a space of, I'm just going to do movies now, and I don't know. I feel like I've done my TV show, and I don't want to be the guy who keeps trying to recapture lightning in a bottle again. And I don't know if I'll ever do TV again, because I only know how to do it one way, which is full time. The idea of other writers are able to executive produce multiple shows and oversee entire staffs. I'm too much of a control freak. I really want to roll up my sleeves, and I love being in the writer's room, and I love being in the editing room, and being involved in all that. So I'm a bit of a helicopter parent when it comes to the management of the show, but I just didn't have any ideas for what my next show would be. And then I read Tom's book, and I was like, I need to do this, and it feels too big to be a movie. So let's just start here. HBO already controlled the rights, and then it very organically kind of came together. But I do think one of the things that drew me to it, other than the fact that it was the anti-mystery show, the idea that it very boldly declared in its premise, we're not going to resolve the thing that you most want us to resolve.
Yeah.
You still want to watch.
Yeah.
I thought that that was a very bold decision on Tom's part, and I wanted to honor it. That drew me to it. But the other thing that drew me to it was that maybe the genre already happened. You know, maybe the departure itself was the only genre that the show would ever present. But because the departure happened, there'd be a lot of confusion as to what was genre and what wasn't. You know, is Holy Wayne's hug a psychological effect, or is it a genre effect? Is Kevin really dead and traipsing through the afterlife, or is that just, you know, what's happening inside his oxygen deprived brain? So that stuff, kind of the subjectivity of the show, the interpretive aspect of the show, felt really cool to me, and I just locked in. And I think that all the storytelling that I'm drawn to always has that sort of air of supernaturality to it. We have a producer on the show, consulting producer Reza Aslan, who's a religious scholar, amazing guy, and he gets angry at me when I use the word supernatural, because he's like, that's not a real word, supernatural. That's not real. It's just you know, it's just natural that we don't understand yet. And so he makes me say metaphysical, which sounds very pretentious, and he can get away with it because he's better educated than I. But you know, I am drawn to the metaphysical, and will continue to probably explore it until people stop letting me do it.
That's right. And we are very happy that you are drawn to the metaphysical. Thank you, Damon, for your time today. We really appreciate it. And good luck for season 3, and hopefully 80-1 odds and possibly Emmy nominations. You never know.
I appreciate that. And where are you exactly in Australia? You don't have to divulge your address, but what part?
No, I'm in Sydney. I'm in the best city in Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and we really always appreciate
how at some point then.
Sorry?
No spoiler. I may see you in person at some point soon. No spoiler. Yeah.
No spoilers there. And we really appreciate your time, mate. Good luck.
Thanks, Rob. Take it easy, man.
Okay.